Hello guys, this is Oroth and a warm welcome back to my channel. Tomorrow they will finally release the new Tempest class, but before showcasing some cool builds with the Tempest, I thought it would be nice to go back to my roots and play some Necromancer. And I really wanted to share with you a very efficient dungeon build that I'm using right now. And let us first look at the skills. So in the first slot I'm using Skeletal Mage, in the second slot I use Command Skeletons, in the third slot I use Wraith Form, and in the fourth and final slot I use Bone Armor, and as primary attack I use Soulfire. So let us take a look at the essences first, and I'm using in the helmet slot Blinding Storm, and what it says is that Command Skeletons now summons the Storm Rider Legion, who automatically teleport to and damages enemies with lightning. So as you can see now I get these blue skeletons, you've probably tried them out yourself, and yeah, it's a good source of damage. And what's also very good is that whenever I use Command Skeleton like this on a target, I will also apply a buff to my lightning damage, because if we look here on the page and we go to Command Skeletons, we can see that we can command the Storm Rider Legion to charge to a target enemy, attacking and applying shock, which will increase all lightning damage the target receives. And this buff is more specifically 50%, so it's a very strong damage buff. In the chest slot I'm using Stormcaller's Bones, and what it does is that Bone Armor now generates a pulse that wreaths you and your summons in lightning, causing electric links to form that damage enemies. And let's see what it looks like. When I now use Bone Armor, you will see these arcs, and whenever an enemy is hit by one of these arcs, they will take damage. And what's also good is that this also applies the shock effect, the same buff we just showed with the Command Skeletons. So whenever I use the Bone Armor, it will apply this shock effect to all of the nearby enemies. So also very good to have another way to activate that buff. In the shoulder slot I'm using Synod's Anointing, and what it does is that Skeletal Mage maximum charges increased by 1. So instead of 1 Skeletal Mage we can summon 2 at the first phase when we engage. In the leg slot I'm using Bleak Augury, and what it says is that Wraith Form now increases your movement speed and evasion rating, allowing you to move unhindered through enemies and generate corpses when you pass through them. So whenever I use Wraith Form now, I gain 50% movement speed, and I can also use skills while under this type of Wraith Form, which is a lot better than the normal Wraith Form, because if I, you know what it looks like, but let me just show you. When I use a normal Wraith Form and then I use a skill, I interrupt the Wraith Form, so it's not as good as this essence. In the first main hand slot we're using Pierce Hammer, and what it says is that it increases damage done by Command Skeletons a little bit. In the first offhand we use Spite Feeder, and what it says is that Soulfire now has a 25% chance to explode on hit, dealing damage to nearby enemies and causing them to burn. In the first main hand slot we use Revenant Wind, and what it says is that Wraith Form now calls forth spirits to haunt up to 3 nearby enemies, dealing damage over 3 seconds, while also reducing their movement speed by 30%. So if you look carefully now when I use Wraith Form, you can see there is like 3 wisps shooting out from my character, and these wisps will automatically seek up targets. So if I try one more time here, you can see 3 wisps. And yeah, it's a nice little addition, but this essence is not so vital in this setup. Finally, we use in the second offhand slot Crest of the Skyfallen, and what it says is that Skeletal Mage now summons Thunder Mages that attack with Chain Lightning. So what's good about these mages is that they of course get the buff from the shock effect that we could apply both with the skeletons and with the Bone Armor. So the idea of this build is to have a balance of damage and movement speed and mobility, and yeah, I think that this is a kind of a sweet spot because I'm able to kill off things very fast without sacrificing any mobility. So it works very well. And let's take a look quick here on the set piece I'm using. It's nothing out of the ordinary. I'm using 4 pieces of Shepherd for some extra damage and critical hit chance. And I'm using 4 pieces of Vitus Urge, which will increase the duration of beneficial effects by 30%, and also give both me and my summons some attack speed. So a very good setup for this specific build. What I also want to explain, which is important, is that if I go here and look on my attribute screen, we can see now that my movement speed is 17%. And this 17% is something that I get from Bloodsoaked Jade, which gives me 10%, and I get 4% from one of the rings and 3% from one of the other rings. So if we take 10 plus 4 plus 3, then we end up with 17 movement speed. And here it's important to note that the cap value that you can get here is 20%. So let's say now I'm in offensive stance, for example. If I switch to defensive stance, which gives me 10% movement speed, if you remember, we just had 17, so if there wouldn't be a cap on 20, we would receive 27, but here we can see now that the movement speed is 20%. This means that if I am able to gain 20% without activating the defensive stance, I don't really need the defensive stance at all. So then it's better to be in offensive stance all the time. So yeah, I could have found a pair of gloves or a necklace with some movement speed in order to achieve this, but this is what I recommend. And what's also important to mention is that the movement speed buff from Wraith form is 50%. So now we are at 17% when we are using offensive stance, and then we get 50% extra when we use Wraith form. And that's a total of 67%. And the cap value that you can get is 70%. So at base you can have a maximum of 20%, and then you can add up to 70% in total if you get some buffs onto yourself. So yeah, always if possible try to cap your movement speed at 70% while using buffs in order to move as fast as possible. And what's also important to mention here is that there is another way to increase movement speed, and that is through increasing your size. And there are 2 easy ways to do this. The first one is to use the Warden Paragon, which gives me 5% plus 3%, so a total of 8%. And let me remind you that tomorrow they will change the Paragon system, but hopefully the effects that we can see here in the different Paragon trees will be available to pick within the new Paragon system as well. So this is what you can look for. Another easy way to increase the size of your character is through your Warband room. And if you use the Protector room, there is a specific remnant called Shepherd's Burden, which increases our size by 15%. So if we use both Warden Paragon and the Protector room with the correct remnant, we will receive 23% extra size. This gives us a higher base speed, because if our base speed is 100, when we are at normal size, we will have a base speed of 123 when we are 23% bigger. And what's important to note here as well is that if we are normal size, then our movement speed, let's say now if I use Wraith form and I use defensive stance so that I have capped movement speed at 70%. If I'm at normal size, I receive 70% of 100, but when I'm at bigger size, I receive 70% of 123. So not only does increased size increase the base speed, it also increases the efficiency of all movement speed buffs. so it's super important to be as big as possible. I know that in some cases some people say that size doesn't matter, but here's the case where size is everything almost. So enough being said about the movement speed. Let's take a quick look on the gems I'm using. I'm using 4 different 5-star gems. I use Blood-Soaked Jade, I use Echoing Shade, and I use Rolling Consequence, and finally Bottled Hope. I use 3 2-star gems in the forms of Mother's Lament, Pain Clasp, and Fervent Fang. And as the 1-star gem I use Berserker's Eye. And here some people might wonder why I'm using Fervent Fang, because if you didn't know it, Fervent Fang does not increase the damage done by your summons. But here what's important is that the main source of burst damage when we want to kill a dungeon boss comes from the bone armor. So the bone armor will be affected by Fervent Fang. And what's also important to note is that in order for the bone armor to deal as much damage as possible, we want to stand on the target. We don't want to stand far away from it, because when we stand on the target or just beside it, if we position ourselves very well, all the arcs from the bone armor will hit the target and deal more damage. And then we can't use Bloody Reach, that will increase the damage done the further away we stand from the target. So if you take a look here on Bloody Reach, we can see that this will increase the damage the further away we stand from the target. And it will not be optimal with this specific build. So yeah, this is the build itself. Now it's time to venture out into some dungeons and see what it looks like in action. So we start with Tomb of Ahir here, and I'm gonna do these runs solo, just to show you how I'm playing the build. So the first thing we do when we enter a dungeon is that we use Wraith form immediately. And this is to reach the boss as fast as possible. And yeah, since we're doing this solo, we have to kill both of the idols here. So I'm putting down my summons, and then I'm standing inside the boss to make sure that all of the bone armor arcs hits it. And it will deal a lot of damage. So we don't need to have maximal DPS. We have opted for a lot more mobility because the damage is enough. When I come to a boss, I always put down 2 mages immediately, because now I had time to summon a 3rd one before the boss spawns. And yeah, in this situation I should have positioned myself on the other side of the boss a little bit faster to make sure that all of the arcs were hitting it, but we still killed it fast enough. We go through the portal, and as soon as we can, we use Wraith form and we run to pull the lever here on the elevator. So this new Wraith form, it's almost like the sprint buff from a barbarian. And now we are finally able to cap our movement speed without any help. So this latest release of SSS has unlocked a lot of possibilities, both in terms of dungeon potential but also in open world farming for the Necromancer. So all in all, maybe there were no SSS that were groundbreaking and providing an entire new archetype, but at least this is a very efficient tool, the new Wraith form here that we're using. So this is the Tomb of Ahir. We're also going to take a look at the Cavern of Echoes here. And as you can see, once again, I use Wraith form immediately. And then I put down my summons and I activate Bone Armor afterwards to make sure that all of the summons gets the buff. And always before the boss spawns, I'm using the primary attack to also spawn my clones from the Echoing Shade legendary gem. And for each summon that I have, the more arcs I will deal damage with using Bone Armor. So that's a good thing with the Echoing Shade. And always when I'm running dungeons, I'm not killing all of the monsters. I'm just trying to get to next phase all of the time. Just running as fast as possible. Opening this door, I can kill some monsters while the door is opening, and then I run here. And now I'm coming here solo. So I put down something on the right side and something on the left side, because if I'm running random dungeons, maybe I'm ahead of everyone else. If I'm running fast, then I want to kill the mobs here as fast as possible. So I have to spread out my summons if I'm able to. So yeah, this is the dungeon build I'm using right now for Necromancers. If you're able to run dungeons together with the Crusader using Fire Banner, you can use the Craving Bay main hand and switch out the Bone Armor if you want to, for some extra damage output. Yeah, that's all for today, and I hope that you like this build and that you have fun trying it out. And before we say goodbye, I would like to wish you a very nice day or a very nice evening wherever you are. And of course, to all of my clan members in Nyx, I would also like to say Voruk Nyx, Sholak Sol. So, bye bye!
If a boy or if a girl subscribe to Auto's channel, let him take you to his world. Subscribe to Auto's channel, the best choice you will ever make. Subscribe to Auto's channel, hit the bell, a piece of cake. Subscribe to Auto's channel. Let me tell you one more time, cut out from sin. Subscribe to Auto's channel. All the answers you